So, what's going on guys, Kate is here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today, we are taking a in-depth look into the dagger weapon category in Albion Online. So, this dagger category includes one-hand dagger, the dagger pair, the gloves, the bloodletter, then even the Demonfang, deathgivers, and lastly the bridled fury. So if you are wondering which weapons are the best, what they are good for, then in this video we will go over each and every single weapon in this category. Then as well I will explain how the abilities work, which are the best spell combos to use, and lastly for each dagger weapon I will give you the best build for 1v1s, open world PvP, ganking, fame farming, and much more. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So, taking a closer look at the first dagger weapon, which is the one and only one-hand dagger. This weapon is mostly used only in 1v1 corrupted dungeons and solo ganking, because the main goal and the strength of the one-hand dagger is the ability to do a lot of damage while healing yourself. So now we will go over the best build and take a closer look at the best playstyle. So first things first, the weapon of choice is the dagger, and then you go with the second Q, fourth W and first passive. And for your offhand you pick the torch. Then for your helmet you go with the fiend cowl and pick the third ability and first passive. Then for your hunter's jacket you go with the third ability and second passive. And lastly for shoes you pick the royal sandals and go with the third ability and second passive. Then for your choice of capes you go with the bridge cape, and for consumables use the stew and poison potions. And now let's move over to the playstyle. So like I mentioned at the start, the one-hand dagger is master at doing a lot of damage while fully healing yourself. But you have to be very careful and use the abilities in the exact same order I'm telling you. So no matter if you are in a 1v1 dungeon or open world ganking, let's imagine that here for example we are fighting only one guy. So your spell combo is to use your F ability at the start and then use your R plus E ability right after. And then keep on using only auto attacks. And then a bit later, most likely the enemy will be trying to run away from you. So then catch him with your W spell and keep on auto attacking the target 24/7. So what this F plus R plus E auto attack did basically activated your boots, giving you extra speed and increasing the damage percentage. Then your R and E spell gave you 50% faster attack speed and the ability to deal more damage and steal the enemy's health every single time you deal damage. And then lastly we have the W spell, which by using you throw a dagger, and if you hit someone then you will stun the target and dash to him. Then for a Q spell we have a simple short jump spell, which deals damage and can make you move around a little bit faster. And then last but not the least we have the D ability, which is a purge, and if you see a player activating his healing abilities or maybe trying to run away, then purge him and all the positive effects will be removed. And then as well we have the poison potions and the cape. So that cape will be activated right after you auto attack an enemy, and you will slow him when doing your combo. And for poison potions it should be self-explanatory, but use it at the beginning of the fight or when you see it fit. As well I mentioned that the one-hand dagger might be useful in solo ganking as well. So I have to say that this is not the best ganking build, but it's viable just in case you want to do a variety of PvP activities. So with this weapon you lock on your targets with the W ability and then use the same R plus E combo and keep on catching up to the enemy with the boots, then the helmet and everything else. So in conclusion, for a first weapon, the one-hand dagger is definitely not the easiest choice of weapons to use. The cost for this build will be more expensive than the other weapons, but if you enjoy the playstyle and you want to try this one out, then here it is. Then moving over to the second dagger weapon, which this time is the dagger pair. So this weapon is usually used in ganking and very rarely in corrupted dungeons. But it is a pretty easy weapon to outplay, so the build I will show you is specifically made for solo or group ganking. And the main strength of the dagger pair is to get 3 stacks, then go invisible and then use your E ability, which should one-shot the enemy. So moving over to the build, for the weapon of choice we go with the dagger pair and pick the third Q, fourth W and first passive. Then for your helmet you pick the cleric cowl and go with the third ability and first passive. But as well you could use from the previous build the fiend cowl for the purge. But with this weapon I found it quite bad not to have at least one defensive against a one-shot enemies, so it's up to you. But then for the chest armor you get the assassin's jacket and go with the third ability and second passive. And lastly for boots, go with the hunter shoes and pick the third ability and third passive. Then for your choice of capes you go with the Tetford cape, and for consumables use the stew and poison potions. And then as far as the playstyle goes, so basically like I said at the start, you want to get 3 stacks, go invisible and then use your E ability. So there are many ways you can catch an enemy while ganking. Most used one is usually to run up to a player in an open world with my F ability and auto attack once the horse and throw a poison potion. By doing this, the enemy should be dismounted, so now you can follow the target, and as soon as you get your Q ability to 3 stacks, use your W ability to catch a player and then use your E ability. Of course, there is another way. You can just stand on a road and as soon as you see a guy, you go invisible and try to one-shot the enemy on a horse and etc. But all of this is up to you. The more you will play this weapon, the better you will get. You most importantly remember to always have 3 stacks and then use your E ability. And for defensives, you can run away from trouble using the R ability and go invisible. And just in case if the enemy wants to attack you, you can protect yourself and go ice block. So in conclusion, this dagger pair is very good single target DPS weapon. All you have to keep in mind is to get 3 stacks plus E ability, and if you like this weapon, then check it out. Then moving over to the third dagger, which is the one and only Claws. So for this weapon you don't have to wait for stacks or anything like that. The main strength of this weapon is to lock a target down and apply as much bleed and sustained damage as possible. So for this build, the weapon of choice is of course the Claws. So for the abilities you want to go with the first Q, fourth W and first passive. Then for your helmet you pick the Mage Cowl and go with the third ability and first passive. Then for the chest armor, you pick the mercenary jacket and go with the third ability and first passive. And lastly for shoes, you get the soldier boots and pick the third ability and second passive. Then for my choice of capes, you go with the Tetford cape, and for consumables, use the stew and poison potions. As well, by the way, this build is good for open world PvP and ganking. So your objective with this weapon is to lock down a target and not allow him to move. So what you want to do is as soon as you see a player, try to catch him with your W spell. And then while he's on a horse or not, just use your E spell. Then when that has finished channeling, use your poison potions, then Q and D spell in no matter what order. To run away from the enemies or catch them, use your F ability, which every second will give you faster speed. And at the beginning it will start slowly, but at the end you will outrun any other run ability in the game. And lastly, if the enemy is trying to fight you or you are even up against 2 players, then when you use your E ability the second time right after, just before that activate your R ability and only then press the E spell. And similarly, like the one-hand dagger, it will heal you and deal damage to the enemy in return. So in conclusion, this is one of the strongest ganking weapons ever. Of course, for more damage you could change the helmet or switch up boots to hunter shoes or something like that. But whatever you decide to do, remember this weapon's playstyle, and I hope you have fun using Claws. And now we have come to the fourth weapon, which is probably everyone's most favorite dagger, and it is the Bloodletter. So the huge advantage of this weapon is that you can make it into a very good 1v1, 5v5 ganking build or basically any other build in the game. The Bloodletter has such a massive choice of abilities to use, and it is the best mobility weapon in the game. So with that in mind, I will show you all around Bloodletter build for basically every single activity. So if you want to go and do 1v1s, 100 versus 100, ganking or anything else, then this build is for you. So then for the weapon of choice, we go with the Bloodletter and pick the second Q, fifth W and first passive. And for my offhand, we go with the Crypt Candle. Then for the helmet, you pick the Mage Cowl and go with the third ability and first passive. Then for my chest armor, I went with the Assassin's Jacket and picked the third ability and second passive. And lastly for shoes, I got the Guardian Boots and picked the first ability and second passive. Then for my choice of capes, you go with the Tetford cape, and for consumables, use the stew and poison potions. And just before we go into the playstyle, I want to quickly mention that for 1v1 fights, you want to change your Assassin's Jacket ability to the second option. Then for ganking, change your daggers ability to the fourth W, and if you ever come across a 1 vs 2 or super strong build, then switch your boots ability to the third spell. Like I have said, this build is meant for a huge variety, so feel free to change spells depending on which activity you are doing. And of course, the same goes with doing PvE activities like fame farming. So then as for this weapon's playstyle, which is depending of course on what you're using it for. Just keep in mind that you use any abilities you want in no specific order, except the E ability. So your Q is a small dash spell, which will damage players, then your W is another dash, just a bit further with more damage and can be applied once per every player. And lastly we have the D ability to give your weapon a poison effect. Then we have the R ability to go invisible and F ability to run to fights or run away from them. And then most importantly on what this build is meant for, which is that when a player is below 40% health, you use your E ability and one-shot the enemy. So in conclusion, this Bloodletter build is very versatile and good for anything PvP or PvE related. The playstyle as well is simple and beginner friendly, so if you were looking for a weapon that you can use anywhere and doing anything, then this is it. Then for one of my last dagger weapons we have the almighty Demonfang. So this build is basically the king of open world PvP, and especially if you're playing with just few teammates and they stun the enemies, you can easily do a lot of AoE damage. So the weapon of choice is of course the new weapon called the Demonfang, and for the abilities we go with the second Q, 5th W and 1st passive. And then for the offhand we go with the Crypt Candle. Then for my choice of helmet I picked the Clerical and went with the 3rd ability and 1st passive. Then for my chest armor I went with the Cleric Robe and picked the 3rd ability and 1st passive. And lastly for boots I got the Royal Sandals and picked the 3rd ability and 2nd passive. Then for my choice of capes you go with the Tether cape, and for consumables use the Deadwater Eel Stew and Poison Potions. So then moving over to the gameplay. This build can be used in corrupted dungeons and small scale open world PvP or ganking, but it's primarily meant for PvP. So your playstyle is to first of all activate the F ability, then run to the enemy and then use the R ability, and then use the weapon's E ability 3 times in a row. And if you catch multiple players, you'll be able to do a lot of damage. Then when that combo is done, now use your Q ability and W, and again, the more players you are fighting, the more times you will be able to use the W spell. And then lastly, if you ever get caught or in trouble, then activate the Ice Block ability, and you should be good to go. So if you're looking for one of the best open world PvP weapons, then this is the one for you, so enjoy! Then taking a closer look at the next dagger weapon, which are the deathgivers. So this weapon is very hard to play and is very known for being the best invisibility playstyle in the game. So that means you will get more than 4 different invisibility abilities and much more. So moving over to the build, the weapon of choice is the deathgivers. And for the abilities you pick the 3rd Q, 5th W and 1st passive. Then for my helmet I went with the Stalker's Hood and chose the 3rd ability and 1st passive. Then for my chest armor I went with the Assassin's Jacket and picked the 3rd ability and 1st passive. And lastly for boots I got the Hylian shoes and picked the 3rd ability and 2nd passive. Then for my choice of capes you go with the Tether cape, and for consumables use the Stew and Poison Potions. And now let's go over to the weapons playstyle. So like I said at the start, your main objective is to stay invisible, and as you don't have any real defensive abilities, your biggest defense or protection is the invisibility. So for your spell combo, what you want to do is always have your Q spell on 3 stacks. For the daggers it's super simple and you don't even have to press Q spell 3 times, but instead just press it once and it will automatically go to 3 stacks. And then when you have that done, use your F ability, and when the ability is done channeling you will dash towards the enemy, and then use your E once, and then activate your Q, and then R ability by going invisible, and when you get again back to 3 stacks use again your E spell. Just this time, before using it right when your invisibility is about to end, use your D ability and then press E again, and keep on doing this till the enemy is dead. So basically the method or the trick behind deathgivers is that you use your E ability with 3 stacks and you won't lose it but instead be able to use it again. So you can use the E ability 24/7 and never have to make it to go on cooldown. The only time you want your E to go on cooldown is if the enemy is 1 hit away from dying, so then you really don't care if you use the E with no 3 stacks. So in conclusion, this weapon and build is very complicated and takes time to learn, but if you do, then you'll be able to be unstoppable with the build. So what are you waiting for? Check deathgivers out and enjoy! And with that said, now we have come to the last and final dagger weapon, which is the Bridled Fury. This is another sort of one-shot build, or basically like a high damage weapon, but it can deal damage in an AoE range. So first of all, let me show you this OP build and then I will explain the playstyle. So the weapon of choice is of course the Bridled Fury, and for the abilities we go with the 2nd Q, 5th W and 1st passive. Then for my helmet we pick the Spectre's Hood and go with the 3rd ability and 1st passive. Then for my chest armor I chose the Hylian Jacket and picked the 3rd ability and 1st passive. And lastly, for shoes, you pick the Royal Sandals and go with the third ability and second passive. Then for your choice of capes, you go with the Tether cape, and for consumables, use the stew and poison potions. And then quickly going over to the weapons playstyle. So basically your E ability does massive damage in 7-meter radius, and you don't even need to select a target, just simply use your Q spell on an enemy 3 times, and then around when the players are standing use your E ability, and your target will do bunch of damage while the character itself will jump backwards. So your spell combo is to get your Q to 3 stacks, then activate your F ability, and with that speed and increased damage use the E ability and one-shot the enemies. And then lastly we have the R ability, which gives you a life aura, and if enemies are standing in that circle, it will damage them and give you health back. And then we have as well the D ability, which basically by using you will right after get your R spell back, so you can use it 2 times in a row. So in conclusion, this is a very powerful weapon with one-shot AoE possibilities, while being able to survive and having a lot of self-healing. The best thing about this build is that it's really good for CVZs and open world PvP. So for sure try this weapon out, and I hope you have fun. And that's about it. So I really do appreciate everyone for watching guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions, feedback or other weapon categories that you would like to see in the next video, then feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and you won't miss any more amazing content from me. With that said, you have an amazing day and I will catch you in my next video. So take it easy, peace.
Yo, I ain't here for